This podcast is brought to you by Anchor Podcasts. Have you yourself ever wanted to be a podcaster? Well, Anchor makes it simple and easy for you to start today. Download their app on your iPhone or Android device and go through their step-by-step process from recording all the way through distribution. Visit their website, anchor.fm, or download the app on your Android or iPhone device today. That's Anchor Podcast. What's going on, everybody? Travis Fowler Harkrider back again this week for another edition of the Four Corner Podcast. So you know what that means. Let's talk wrestling. This week, we are getting closer to WrestleMania, and you can feel it because all the stories that WWE has been working on for months on end are having their payoffs just imminent at this point. And it's really cool because honestly, we have so many stories that are long form stories that are going to be paying off here next weekend. And it's insane to think that WrestleMania is literally a week from today. I'm recording on Saturday in the afternoon, which means WrestleMania, by the time this drops, is only going to be 5 days away. That's crazy to me that we're already here. But I've loved everything that's gone on. Obviously, the Bloodline segments for this week with Cody, Sami, and Kevin, and of course the Bloodline themselves, have all been superb. The promo battle on Monday between Cody and Roman was absolutely exquisite. They are doing what they are needing to do by keeping Roman and Cody interacting with each other, and obviously with the overall Bloodline story still going. You've got these two figureheads that are just talking. And that's brilliant because they're saving the actual physicality for the match at WrestleMania Sunday, which is old school to the core, and I love it. I love everything about the story that's been going on. On SmackDown, we saw the segments continue with Sami and Kevin, and of course, they baited the Usos into a fight. That was great as well. Everything has just been hitting on all cylinders. Edge and Finn Balor, of course, are going to be facing each other in Hell in a Cell. That's a story that dates all the way back to Judgment Day turning on Edge last summer. And now we get the finality of that rivalry. Dominic and Rey finally had a physical altercation where Rey snapped and hit Dominic last night. So now that is paying off at WrestleMania with the match that we knew was coming. That's been worked on all the way since September. So we have so many stories this year, and it feels exciting that WrestleMania is just a week away. I know I'm stoked for the show personally. Are there a couple bummer notes? Sure. Brock Lesnar Almost is not something I'm really looking forward to, but, we got what we got. And, of course, the Bray Wyatt Bobby Lashley scenario didn't pan out, which sucks that Bray's not going to be on the show, it looks like. They announced Lashley and LA Knight, which are two people that a lot of people thought would be prominent figures for WrestleMania. They're in the Andre the Giant Memorial Battle Royal next week on SmackDown. So there's a couple down notes. But overall, I think WrestleMania is shaping up to be an awesome night. It was announced last night that Austin Theory and Cena are going to kick off WrestleMania weekend with the opening match on WrestleMania Saturday, which is awesome to start off. Overall, it feels like a big fight atmosphere, and the fact that we're just a mere week out from WrestleMania is still just absolutely insane to me. Anything else going on in the wrestling world? Well, of course there is. It's wrestling. There's always something going on. AEW this week was highlighted by the El Vikingo, or I'm just totally butchered his name, so we're just going to call him Vikingo, taking on Omega, which got 5 stars, surprise, surprise, from the Wrestling Observer. And it was a good match. For what it was supposed to be, it was a good match. I do have some thoughts on it that I will present here in just a little bit. On AEW, we also saw Stokely Hathaway and Hook do their match, which was, it was what it was. I'm not really interested in that story anyway. FTR came out to confront the Guns after they retained their tag titles against Top Flight and said that if they cannot defeat the Guns for the titles, then they are leaving AEW. So it'll be interesting to see with the announcement from Dax Harwood earlier this week that they have made a decision of what they're going to do in April. Is this part of it? Are we going to see FTR leave? Are they going to end up winning the tag titles? So good stuff there. The Blackpool Combat Club still is going roughshod over everybody, and specifically the Dark Order and Hangman Page. Of course, we saw that story continuing with some doubt in that form of Kenny Omega, because we saw Kenny get attacked by the Blackpool Combat Club after he won his match, and then Hangman tried to make the save, but then Don Callis, of all people, staged to look like Hangman hit him. So that is intriguing as to what exactly is going to go on from there. I honestly do look forward to seeing how things pan out on that story front. And honestly, AEW's not been half bad. They're doing great on their storytelling, which is making some intriguing television. So I look forward to seeing what goes on next week. And Impact Wrestling had Sacrifice last night, and then, of course, their weekly television show on Thursday. Good stuff is going on over there, too. They had great storytelling, but unfortunately, they just got hit pretty severe with an injury bug on two of their top stars that also were two champions. The women's champion, of course, referred in Impact as the Knockouts champion, Mickie James, is down with an injury that is questionable on how quickly she can return. If she could make it to the Rebellion pay-per-view in April, as they announced, there would be a triple threat match, but as it stands, it will be a straight-up one-on-one match between Jordynne Grace and the winner of a fatal four-way match next week. So bummer note for Mickie. I hope the best for her and hope she can get back. She's been on a great roll since doing the last rodeo story last year, so I hope that everything can work out for her. And then, of all things, Josh Alexander, who is the longest reigning champion in Impact history, has torn his tricep. So he is now out, which means the Impact World title is now vacated. But it will be decided at Rebellion when Steve Maclin will take on Kushida. And I'm a real bummer note for that, strictly because I was really looking forward to seeing Maclin and Alexander go at it. Their story seemed to be a little non-existent, except for the mere fact that Steve Maclin won his opportunity at the title. But it turns out after this past episode on Impact Wrestling's weekly show, Macklin's been scouting Alexander this whole time, and it actually was really, really intriguing on where they were going, and it's such a bummer that Alexander's out, but hopefully he can make a full recovery and we get that match sooner rather than later. I know I was very much looking forward to seeing it, and I still hope to get to see it here in the very near future. Now, going back to Vikingo and Kenny Omega, I of course, talked about it on last week's episode that in this quote-unquote dream match, it wasn't something I was necessarily looking forward to because of the fact that it's just a thrown-together match. But after it was presented to me that that is okay in wrestling and why that's okay, and it made a lot of sense as to why, I came around on that and just I had to understand that myself personally, I like more story to go with my matches as opposed to just thrown together matches. But really, there's no wrong way to do either one, honestly. But overall, for what that match was supposed to be, as I stated earlier, it was a great match. It's not my cup of tea that I would normally like to drink. There's a couple things that are very noticeable in there, and I think a lot of people who have been wrestling purists have already spoke out about this. They kept to a very lucha libre based type of matchup, which is of course Vikingo's specialty, and Kenny knows how to work that style anyway. So there was a lot of moments where it felt like they were just waiting for the next move, and that's kind of how it goes in lucha libre. It's a lot more flash and flare as opposed to telling the story there. You pretty much are looking at a stunt spectacle. But for what it was supposed to be in that match, it was a great match. There's no taking it away. A lot of cool spots were there. And for me personally, if they're going to bring Vikingo back at this point, they better pair him up for a match with Rey Fenix, because honestly, seeing Vikingo and Rey Fenix would be amazing. Obviously, those are two mainstays in the Mexican wrestling scene. Those two were standard bearers of Mexican wrestling for the longest time. So I'd love to see those two go at it. You could even throw Pentagon in there as well to have a match with Vikingo in the future if they haven't already, which I'm pretty sure at this point they've had at least one encounter. If I'm wrong, though, please tell me. And then if I'm right, go ahead and throw that video down in the comments so I can watch it later. Now, on to something I kind of want to discuss, and I've briefly touched on it over the last couple weeks, but we're rounding out the month of March, which has been Women's History Month, or celebrating women's history. And when it comes to professional wrestling, women haven't always had the best of luck when it comes to professional wrestling. The ones that took it seriously really didn't have a chance to shine until just these past recent years, which some of the great women's wrestlers from back in the 80s to the 90s and even in the 2000s really don't get the recognition they deserve. And if they would be in today's environment in wrestling, they would be adored much more than what they were back then. A greater appreciation would be had for their talents, from Mae Young to Fabulous Moolah to Wendy Richter even. You've also got women like Medusa, also known as Alundra Blaze, Bull Nakano, Bertha Faye even though she was kind of more gimmick than anything. Aja Kong. There's so many different names that made an impact, but unfortunately, I only know of a select few because at that time, women's wrestling was not celebrated as much as it is now. Even in the early 2000s, with the Raw Divas division, when they separated the rosters originally, there were a lot of good women's wrestlers. Obviously, Trish Stratus and Lita are two that come to mind, especially Trish because of her evolution from being just the WWE diva prototype of just someone who looked good through that era that we all suffered through, really. She turned into a great wrestler that many look at as the GOAT. That's kind of my stance, honestly. Lita, her resume speaks for itself. She's an all-time great. But then you also got women like Molly Holly, Jazz, Jacqueline, who I didn't know for the longest time competed in WCW and was originally a manager for Harlem Heat. Speaking of Harlem Heat, Sherry Martel from the 80s would have a great wrestler who could have made serious impact in today's world. Going back to those 2000 women's wrestlers, I mentioned Jackie and Jazz. Victoria is one that's a prime candidate as well. All these women didn't have their chance to shine like they would today. With the presentation that we have of women like Charlotte, Bayley, Sasha Banks, now Mercedes Moné, Becky Lynch, the list can go on and on and on. So many different women have had the spotlight on them. Alexa Bliss is one that comes to mind as well. Carmella is a great character. Liv Morgan has had people in the palm of her hand for a long time. Her momentum kind of slowed down when she became champion, but she's gained some of that back since her title reign and her feud with Ronda ended. But there is just so much talent, especially on the NXT women's side of things, as I talked about last week. They have an abundance of talent that's going to flourish, I believe, on the main roster. So I just want to take this time to appreciate all of the women's wrestlers, not just in the big companies, but also across all of professional wrestling. The AEW women's locker room, the WWE women's locker room, and every Indie Feds women's locker room. Thank you very much for being in the sport, because the ones that are in it are passionate about it, and your passion is felt and your work is much appreciated. Now, I say all that and let's go to WrestleMania. Speaking of women's wrestling, it came out this week that, as the plan stands, night one of WrestleMania is going to be main evented by Rhea Ripley and Charlotte Flair. And I think we've touched on this already a little bit, but if this is indeed the main event for night one, you're already messing up WrestleMania. And from what I understand, as well as what's been reported, the reason that's main eventing is all due to political reasons. And honestly, that's the dumbest reason to do it. This is no offense to Rhea Ripley or Charlotte Flair. but their match and program has had a very short build that honestly hasn't been the greatest anyway. This isn't like when they first had their match at WrestleMania 36 in the Pandemic Mania, which ended up being a great match, but there's not, I don't think, as much intrigue behind it this time around as there was back then. Even though both women are at the top of their game, the story build for the match has not been stellar. And while people, I'm sure, are looking forward to it, it's not to the level of being main event. I've said it, many others have said it. There is already a main event in place, as it should. Night one should be main evented by the undisputed tag team titles on the line, with the Usos defending against Sami Zayn and Kevin Owens. I know there's still a week out before night one, so hopefully some senses will come and we will see that actually get its rightful place as the main event. Because honestly, I think if you put Ripley and Flair as the main event, you're kind of already setting them up for failure, because so many people are more invested in the actual Bloodline story for night one than what they would be with Ripley and Flair. Speaking of Bloodline, I know we've talked a lot about them over the last weeks, or, well, let's face it, since this podcast began, they've been a topic of conversation because it's just been so good. I started thinking, what kind of faction could face the Bloodline if you wanted to compare who was like a greater heel faction, a WWE created heel faction, not in all of wrestling. And I just thought to myself, wouldn't it be cool to have a clash of generations where you would have a faction that dominated the early 2000s taking on the Bloodline? I think you might be able to figure out what faction I'm talking about. Evolution versus Bloodline. Triple H, Batista, Randy Orton, and heck, throw Ric Flair in there as well. All of them still working very well, three of which were in their prime, taking on the Bloodline. Okay, well, maybe not all of them were in their prime. Speaking of Evolution, that is. Of course, Randy Orton was in his 20s, and he didn't hit his prime and stride until around the 2010 era, but he was still a great worker for being so young. So, Evolution versus the Bloodline. Randy Orton, Triple H, Batista. If you even just want to make it 3 against 3 and have Ric Flair as a manager. Of course, Solo Sikoa manages them on the outside, maybe with Paul Heyman standing there as well, against Roman Reigns and the Usos. I mean, come on. Like, that would be a fun match to watch. And I know this was just kind of random and out of nowhere, but it hit me at one point earlier this week where I was like, that would just been a fun match to witness. Evolution at its all-time great against the Bloodline at its all-time great, I think would be a fun faction match had that ever had a chance to take place. Now, I've seen some debate over this past week as to who's going to end up walking out of WrestleMania as the undisputed champion. Heck, even my own lady has asked me if she really thinks the Cody's going to be the man after Mania, because I firmly believe he's going to win. But then there's been reports that some backstage really want Roman to hit the 1,000-day mark, and they feel like there's a little bit more stories that you can stretch out of Roman. And they may keep the title on him. And this brings up something that I thought was something worth talking about. Is WrestleMania becoming too predictable? At one point, I thought it was, because I honestly was looking at the proposed card and thought I could pick out the winners for each match that was either announced or that was going to be announced. And as it stands right now, I feel confident on some of them. But on others, like Cody and Roman, I'm not so sure about right now. Cody and Roman has been a great story, but when you've got the reports that we've heard about them potentially wanting to do more with Roman as champion, and then you've got all of the opportunities with Cody if he becomes champion, you weigh it out. And I stated this last week, and I do truly feel that they really should put the championship on Cody, because they run the risk of turning Roman's title reign into a Cena Lowell situation. I think Roman's done tremendous work with the undisputed title, but that time has got to expire at some point. And right now, you don't have a better opportunity than at this very moment. Cody is getting positive reactions every single place that they go. The fans just eat him up. And now is the time to strike while the iron's hot. If they make Cody champion at WrestleMania, he will be at that superstar level now. He will be the face of a company, and he rightfully deserves it. He does have the look, he has the attitude, he has so much opportunity for the company in front of him as the babyface champion. Now, I understand that that's not what normally draws money, and they probably won't keep the title on him for an excessive amount of time. But right now, you have an opportunity to have a new top star for your company, a well-represented face of your company in Cody Rhodes. I would take this opportunity over the 1,000-day mark with Roman. Roman Reigns has done his time, and now he deserves a break from carrying the company. And Cody's more than willing to put the company on his shoulders and take it to another level. So, my predictions, I still want Cody to win. Is it still iffy? Absolutely. And is WrestleMania becoming too predictable? Well, like I said, maybe in some instances, but I have to say, overall, there's a lot of matches that have me questioning who's going to walk out as the champion or who's just going to walk out as a winner if there's no title at stake. It's going to be a fun WrestleMania these 2 nights we got next week. I can't wait for it. That brings up something that I noticed, though, on WWE's YouTube page this past week. They uploaded the full segment of John Cena and The Rock announcing their WrestleMania 28 match full year in advance. And of course, a lot of people were hoping, like I was as well, that one of the nights of WrestleMania was going to be headlined by Roman Reigns versus The Rock this year. And obviously, we didn't get that. But it got me thinking, they uploaded this clip at a very opportune time. Could this be a way of throwing a hint towards us that WWE is planning something? It was announced earlier this week that they do have a 1-year story built in for WrestleMania next year. So the next WrestleMania has already been lined up, which is incredible in and of itself. But could this be a sign that maybe The Rock comes out at Mania or even the night after Mania, like what happened with Cena, and they announce The Rock versus Roman Reigns for WrestleMania 40? Only time will tell. Again, we're only a week out from the night one of WrestleMania, so there's a lot of questions that I still am very curious as to what happens. But that's all I got actually for this week, you guys. And I want to go ahead and announce that because of the 2-night WrestleMania, along with me having an obligation to my indie company here in Tulsa, there will not be an episode of the Four Corner Podcast next week. We are going to be doing the predictions for WrestleMania next week, but as for a full-on episode for the podcast, we will be doing one following WrestleMania the week after. But no Four Corner Podcast episode next week. But I hope you enjoyed this week's episode, and I hope you're just as excited for WrestleMania as I am. Let me know down in the comments section, and if you think we've earned it, give us a 5-star rating. Make sure you subscribe to the YouTube channel, like and share our videos around. But for now, I bid you adieu, and I hope you continue to love pro wrestling.